The morning sun filtered through the elegant windows of Kensington Palace, but William couldn't shake the heavy feeling in his chest. He sat at his mahogany desk, staring at the official documents that had arrived the previous evening. The words seemed to blur together as he read them for the third time. Kate noticed his unusual silence during breakfast, the way he pushed his food around his plate without taking a bite. "You've been quiet all morning," Kate said softly, reaching across the table to touch his hand. Her wedding ring caught the light, reminding them both of happier times. William looked up at her, his blue eyes clouded with worry. He wanted to tell her everything, but the burden felt too heavy to share. The documents contained news that would change everything they had worked for. The children's laughter echoed from the garden where they played with their nanny. George was teaching Charlotte how to kick a football, while little Louis toddled behind them, trying to keep up. The sound that usually brought smiles to their faces now seemed distant. William stood up abruptly, walking to the window to watch his children play, pressed his palm against the cool glass, leaving a brief print that quickly faded. Kate joined him at the window, slipping her arm through his. They stood in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The weight of their responsibilities had always been heavy, but this felt different. This felt personal. The papers on William's desk contained information about an investigation that could affect their family's reputation and future. Someone had been asking questions about their charitable foundation, raising concerns about financial irregularities. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together," Kate whispered, though her voice trembled slightly. She had learned to read her husband's moods over the years. She knew this wasn't just another royal duty weighing on his mind. This was something that threatened the very core of what they believed in. William turned to look at her, seeing his own fears reflected in her green eyes. The afternoon brought a series of phone calls that only made things worse. William's private secretary spoke in hushed tones about meetings with lawyers and public relations experts. The foundation they had poured their hearts into, the one that helped children across the Commonwealth, was now under scrutiny. Years of hard work and genuine care for others were being questioned by people who had never met the families they had helped. Kate tried to maintain normalcy for the children, reading bedtime stories and tucking them in as usual, but her hands shook slightly as she turned the pages, and her voice caught on words she had read hundreds of times before. George, perceptive for his age, asked if everything was okay. Kate forced a smile and assured him that sometimes grown-ups just had difficult days at work. That evening, William and Kate sat in their private sitting room, the documents spread across the coffee table between them. They read through each page carefully, trying to understand how their good intentions had been twisted into something suspicious. The investigation centered around a large donation that had been made to help build schools in Africa. Someone was suggesting the money hadn't reached its intended destination. "We know where every penny went," Kate said, her voice firm despite the tears threatening to fall. "We visited those schools ourselves, saw the children learning in classrooms we helped build." William nodded, remembering the joy on those young faces when they had visited Kenya the previous year. The memories felt tainted now, overshadowed by doubt and suspicion, as they prepared for bed. Both William and Kate struggled with the same question that would keep them awake for hours. How do you fight against accusations when the very act of defending yourself might bring more attention to the claims? They had always tried to let their actions speak louder than words, but now it seemed their silence was being interpreted as guilt. The irony wasn't lost on them that their desire to help others had somehow put everything they cared about at risk. The next morning brought unwelcome visitors to Kensington Palace. 2 investigators from the Charity Commission arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, their serious expressions and formal briefcases making the elegant hallway feel cold and unwelcoming. William straightened his tie nervously as he prepared to meet them in the library, while Kate checked her appearance one final time in the mirror. Knowing that every detail would be scrutinized, the questioning lasted for 3 hours, each minute feeling like an eternity. Investigators asked about bank transfers, documentation, and meetings that had taken place months earlier. William answered each question carefully, his legal training helping him remain composed even as frustration built inside him. Kate provided additional details about their visits to project sites. her voice steady despite the emotional weight of defending work that meant everything to them. "We have photographs from every school visit," Kate explained, pulling out a tablet to show images of children in newly constructed classrooms. "We didn't just write checks and walk away. We made sure every project was completed properly." Lead investigator, a stern woman in her 50s, barely glanced at the photos before making notes in her file. Her indifference to the evidence felt like a personal insult to everything they had accomplished. After the investigators left, William and Kate felt emotionally drained. They sat in the garden while their children napped, neither of them speaking. For a long time, the roses Kate had planted the previous spring were in full bloom. Their sweet fragrance, a stark contrast to the bitter taste the morning had left in their mouths. Birds chirped in the ancient oak trees, oblivious to the human drama unfolding beneath their branches. "I keep thinking about the children in those schools," Kate finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if this investigation stops? Other people from donating? What if projects get canceled because of these accusations?" William reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers as he had done countless times during difficult moments. The weight of unintended consequences pressed down on them both. The afternoon brought more challenges when William's phone rang with a call from his father's office. King Charles had heard about the investigation and wanted to discuss the potential impact on the monarchy. The conversation was brief but intense, with the king expressing concern about timing and public perception. William assured his father that they had done nothing wrong, but he could hear the worry in the older man's voice. Kate spent the day trying to maintain some semblance of routine, helping Charlotte with her reading and playing blocks with Louis, but her mind kept wandering to the foundation's upcoming projects. They had planned to announce funding for 3 new hospitals in developing countries next month. Now those announcements would have to wait until the investigation concluded, leaving communities that desperately needed help hanging in uncertainty. That evening, they received an unexpected phone call from Marcus, the director of one of the schools they had helped build in Kenya. He had heard rumors about problems with their foundation and wanted to express his support. His broken English couldn't hide the emotion in his voice as he described how the school had transformed his village. Children who had never been able to attend classes were now reading and writing, dreaming of futures they had never imagined. "Possible, you saved my community," Marcus said, his words crackling through the international connection. "These children, they have hope now because of what you did." Kate wiped away tears as she listened, while William gripped the phone tighter. Feeling both vindicated and more determined than ever to clear their names, the call reminded them why they had started the foundation in the first place. As they tucked their children into bed that night, George asked why his parents seemed sad. William knelt down to his son's level, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, grown-ups have to deal with people who don't understand the good things we're trying to do," he explained. "But that doesn't mean we stop trying to help others." George nodded solemnly, though he didn't fully understand the complexity of the situation his parents were facing. Kate stood in the doorway, watching the interaction between father and son, her heart breaking at the innocence in George's questions. She wondered how they would explain things if the investigation dragged on for months. If newspaper headlines started appearing, if their children became targets of gossip and speculation, the protective instincts that had guided her since becoming a mother now felt inadequate against forces beyond her control. 3 weeks into the investigation, strain was beginning to show on both William and Kate. Dark circles had appeared under Kate's eyes despite her attempts to cover them with makeup, and William found himself snapping at staff members over minor issues that normally wouldn't bother him. The constant pressure of maintaining a public facade while privately wrestling with uncertainty was taking its toll on their relationship and their family life. The turning point came during what should have been a routine charity event at a children's hospital in London. William and Kate had committed to the visit months earlier. Canceling would only fuel more speculation about their foundation's problems. They arrived with their usual smiles and warm greetings, but both felt like actors playing roles they no longer believed in. The irony of visiting sick children while their own charity work was under attack wasn't lost on either of them. During their tour of the hospital's new wing, a young patient named Emma approached Kate with a drawing she had made. The 7-year-old girl had been receiving treatment for leukemia for over a year, and her artwork showed a princess helping children around the world. "This is you," Emma said shyly, pointing to the figure in the drawing. "My mummy says you help lots of children like me." Kate knelt down to Emma's level, feeling tears threaten to spill as she accepted the precious gift. William watched the interaction from across the room, remembering why they had dedicated their lives to helping others. The pure gratitude in Emma's eyes reminded him of the children they had met in Kenya, in India, in schools and hospitals around the Commonwealth. These were the people who mattered, not the bureaucrats with their clipboards and suspicions. The drawing that Emma had given Kate became a symbol of everything they were fighting to protect. The hospital visit should have lifted their spirits, but instead, it highlighted how much they stood to lose. During the car ride back to Kensington Palace, Kate stared out the window at the London streets, watching ordinary people go about their daily lives without the weight of public scrutiny on their shoulders. She envied their anonymity, their ability to make mistakes without newspaper headlines and government investigations. "I keep thinking about Emma's drawing," Kate said softly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "What if we can't help children like her anymore? What if this investigation destroys everything we've built?" William reached over to squeeze her hand, but he didn't have any comforting answers. The uncertainty was eating away at both of them, creating doubt where there had once been confidence and purpose. That evening brought devastating news when their lawyer called with an update on the investigation. The Charity Commission had found irregularities in the Foundation's accounting records, specifically related to the timing of fund transfers to their African projects. While no money was missing, the documentation didn't meet current regulatory standards that had been implemented after their donations were made. The retroactive application of new rules felt unfair, but it gave the investigators grounds to continue their inquiry. William felt his world crumbling as he listened to the legal explanations. They had followed all the rules that existed at the time, worked with respected international organizations, and personally verified that funds reached their intended destinations. But bureaucracy and changing regulations had created a paper trail that looked suspicious to people who hadn't been involved in the actual work. The gap between intention and perception had become a chasm that threatened to swallow everything they cared about. Kate found herself unable to eat dinner that night, her stomach churning with anxiety and frustration. She kept thinking about the schools they had helped build, clean water projects that were providing life-saving resources to remote villages, the scholarship programs that were educating the next generation of leaders. All of that good work was now overshadowed by questions about forms and filing deadlines. The children sensed the tension in the house. Even though William and Kate tried to shield them from the adult complexities of their situation, Charlotte asked why her parents weren't reading bedtime stories with the same enthusiasm as before, and Louis became clingy, refusing to let Kate out of his sight during the day. The investigation wasn't just affecting William and Kate anymore. It was rippling through their entire family, changing the atmosphere of their home from one of security to one of uncertainty. As they lay in bed that night, both staring at the ceiling instead of sleeping, William and Kate faced the possibility that their foundation might be forced to close. Years of dedication, millions of pounds raised for worthy causes, and countless lives improved might all become footnotes in a story about regulatory failures and bureaucratic misunderstandings. The injustice of it all felt overwhelming, but they were powerless to change the process that was now beyond their control. The morning of their lowest point arrived with unexpected cruelty when the first newspaper headlines appeared. Someone had leaked details of the investigation to the press, and the story dominated the front pages of several major publications. "Royal Charity Under Fire," screamed one headline, while another asked, "Where did the money go?" William felt physically sick as he read the articles, each one more sensationalized than the last, turning their humanitarian work into a scandal. Kate discovered the headlines when her phone began buzzing with messages from friends and family. Her mother called first, her voice filled with concern and confusion. "These newspapers are saying terrible things," Catherine Middleton said, struggling to understand how her daughter's charity work had become controversial. Kate tried to explain the situation calmly, but her voice cracked as she realized how The story must look to people who didn't know the full details. The palace's communications team went into crisis mode, but their options were limited. Responding to the allegations might validate them in the public's mind, while staying silent could be interpreted as guilt. William and Kate found themselves trapped in a no-win situation, watching their reputations being questioned by people who had never witnessed the positive impact of their work. The feeling of helplessness was more painful than any direct criticism. By afternoon, protesters had gathered outside Kensington Palace gates, holding signs demanding transparency and accountability. Most were peaceful, but their presence served as a constant reminder that public opinion was shifting against them. William watched from his office window as security guards tried to manage the crowd, feeling like a prisoner in his own home. The children had to be kept inside. Their usual afternoon walk in the gardens canceled for their own safety. The international reaction was swift and devastating. Partner organizations in developing countries began distancing themselves from the foundation, afraid that association might harm their own reputations and funding prospects. Projects that had been planned for months were suddenly postponed indefinitely. The ripple effects of the investigation were spreading far beyond William and Kate, affecting vulnerable communities that depended on their support. Kate spent hours on the phone with project directors around the world, trying to reassure them that the foundation's work would continue. But her words felt hollow when she couldn't even reassure herself. A school principal in Bangladesh broke down crying during one call, explaining that the delay in funding might force them to close classes for hundreds of children. Kate hung up, feeling more defeated than she had ever felt in her life. The emotional strain reached a breaking point during what should have been a family dinner. George innocently asked why there were people with cameras outside their home, and Charlotte wanted to know why her parents looked so sad all the time. William and Kate exchanged glances across the table, both realizing that their attempt to protect their children from the crisis had failed. The investigation was stealing more than their professional reputation. It was robbing their family of peace and security. That evening, King Charles made an unprecedented private visit to Kensington Palace. The conversation with his son and daughter-in-law was difficult but necessary, focusing on the potential long-term impact on the monarchy. While he expressed personal support for their charitable intentions, he also had to consider the institution's stability. The weight of disappointing not just the public, but also family members added another layer of pain to an already unbearable situation. Kate found herself unable to sleep again, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios she imagined having. To close the foundation, facing legal consequences, watching their children grow up under the shadow of this controversy, the uncertainty was torture, made worse by the knowledge that innocent people around the world were suffering because of questions about paperwork and bureaucratic procedures. The disconnect between the good they had tried to do and the problems they now faced felt surreal. William wandered through the palace's quiet corridors in the early hours of the morning, stopping in front of portraits of his ancestors who had faced their own challenges and controversies. He wondered how they had found the strength to continue serving the public despite personal struggles and criticism. The weight of duty that had always guided his life now felt crushing rather than inspiring, a burden that threatened to destroy everything he held dear. As dawn broke over London, both William and Kate faced the possibility that their lives would never be the same. The investigation had revealed not just regulatory problems, but also the fragility of reputation and the speed with which good intentions could be twisted into something sinister. They were learning painful lessons about the price of public service and the difficulty of doing good in a world quick to assume the worst. 2 months after the investigation began, William found himself standing outside a modest office building in central London, his hands trembling slightly as he checked the address one final time. The meeting inside would determine whether their foundation could continue operating or if years of charitable work would come to an abrupt end. Kate walked beside him, her usual composure masking the fear that had become her constant companion since the allegations first surfaced. The building housed the offices of an independent auditing firm that specialized in charitable organizations. Their lawyer had recommended this final step after weeks of legal maneuvering and document review. If this audit confirmed what William and Kate already knew, that every penny had been properly allocated and accounted for, it might be enough to clear their names and restore their foundation's reputation. If not, everything they had built would crumble inside the sterile conference room. 3 auditors waited with boxes of documents and computer printouts. The lead auditor, a middle-aged man named David Thompson, had spent his career investigating financial irregularities in nonprofit organizations. His reputation for thoroughness and impartiality was exactly what William and Kate needed, even though his serious demeanor made them both nervous about the outcome. "We've reviewed every transaction from the past 5 years," Thompson began, his voice professional but not unkind. "We've traced funds from initial donations through to final implementation of projects. We've contacted recipients in 12 different countries and verified the completion of work." William and Kate sat on the edge of their chairs, holding hands under the table as they waited for the verdict that would determine their future. The auditor continued methodically through his findings, explaining discrepancies that had raised concerns and how his team had resolved each question. A delayed payment to a construction company in Kenya had been caused by banking holidays, not misappropriation. Documentation gaps in Indian projects were the result of language barriers and different recording systems, not intentional concealment. Each explanation felt like a small victory, but William and Kate remained cautious about celebrating too early. The Charity Commission's concerns were understandable given the complexity of international transfers, Thompson said, flipping through pages of his report. "However, we found no evidence of fraud, mismanagement, or inappropriate use of funds. Your foundation has actually exceeded industry standards for accountability and transparency." Kate felt tears of relief threatening to spill while William struggled to maintain his composure as months of stress began to lift from his shoulders. The vindication felt sweet, but it came with sobering realities. Thompson explained that while they were cleared of wrongdoing, the investigation had highlighted the need for better documentation procedures and more frequent reporting. The charitable sector was evolving rapidly, with increased scrutiny and higher expectations for transparency. Their foundation would need to adapt to survive in this new environment. Walking out of the building 2 hours later, William and Kate felt like different people than they had been when they entered. The weight that had pressed down on them for months was finally lifting, replaced by a mixture of relief and determination. They stood on the busy London street, watching people hurry past on their way to lunch meetings and shopping trips, envying their simple concerns about traffic and weather. "We did nothing wrong," Kate said quietly, as if saying the words aloud would make them more real. William nodded, but both of them knew that being innocent and being perceived as innocent were two different things. The public rehabilitation would be a longer process than the official investigation, requiring patience and continued good work to rebuild trust that had been damaged by speculation and headlines. The drive back to Kensington Palace was subdued despite their legal victory. They both understood that some people would always doubt their motives, regardless of audit results or official clearances. The foundation would continue operating, but under increased scrutiny and with reduced public confidence. Projects would be more difficult to fund. Partners would be more cautious about collaboration. His joy was infectious. His rapid-fire questions about resuming canceled projects, reminding them why they had endured months of investigation and criticism. "The children ask about you every day," he said, his voice crackling through the international connection. "They want to know when the English prince and princess will visit again." Kate wiped away tears, remembering the faces of students who depended on their foundation's work. The children's reaction to their parents' improved mood was immediate and heartwarming. George asked if the work problems were over, while Charlotte simply hugged her mother tighter during bedtime stories. Louis, too young to understand the complexities of adult challenges, seemed to sense that the tension in the house had lifted. For the first time in months, dinner conversation included laughter and plans for future family activities. As evening settled over London, William and Kate sat in their private garden, watching their children play on the swing set William's father had installed years earlier. The roses Kate had planted were beginning their second bloom of the season, their resilience a metaphor for their own journey through crisis and recovery. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and continued scrutiny. But tonight they could finally breathe freely, knowing their integrity had been validated and their mission could continue. 6 months after the investigation concluded, William stood at the front door of their private apartment, his hand resting on the brass handle as he took a deep breath. Kate was in the sitting room, reviewing plans for their foundation's relaunch event when she heard his sharp intake of breath. She looked up to see him frozen in the doorway, his face pale with an expression she couldn't immediately read. Her heart skipped, wondering if more bad news was coming, just as they had begun to rebuild their lives. "Kate," William called softly, his voice carrying an unusual tremor. "You need to come see this." She set down her papers and walked toward him, noticing that his hands were shaking slightly as he gestured towards something outside. Through the narrow window beside the door, she could see the palace courtyard filled with people. But these weren't protesters or journalists. These were children, hundreds of them. Holding handmade signs and flowers, William opened the door slowly. The sound that greeted them was unlike anything they had experienced during the difficult months of investigation and doubt. Children's voices rose in unison, singing songs in different languages, while parents and teachers stood behind them with tears streaming down their faces. At the front of the crowd, Emma, the young cancer patient they had met during their hospital visit, held a banner that read, "Thank you for never giving up." Kate's legs felt weak as she recognized faces from around the world. Students from the school in Kenya stood next to children from the hospital in Bangladesh. Families from their clean water projects in Uganda held photos of new wells and healthy babies. Representatives from every project their foundation had supported had somehow coordinated this gathering, traveling thousands of miles to show their gratitude for work that had continued despite the investigation. An elderly man stepped forward from the crowd, and William recognized him as Dr. Okafor, the head of a medical clinic they had helped establish. "In Nigeria, Your Royal Highnesses," he said, his English careful and respectful when we heard about the troubles you faced. "We wanted to show the world what your foundation really means to our communities. These children are alive and healthy because of your work. These families have hope because you never stopped believing in us." Emma broke away from the group and ran toward Kate, throwing her small arms around the Duchess's waist. I finished. "My treatment," she whispered excitedly. "The doctors say I'm going to be okay. Mommy says it's partly because of the equipment your foundation helped buy." Kate knelt down to Emma's level, tears flowing freely as she hugged the brave little girl who had become a symbol of everything they were fighting to protect. William watched in amazement as more children approached, each carrying letters, drawings, and small gifts from their communities. A boy from Kenya presented him with a wooden carving made by his grandfather. Twin girls from India offered Kate a beautiful scarf woven by women in their village. Every gift represented not just gratitude, but proof of the foundation's positive impact that no investigation or newspaper headline could diminish. The gathering lasted for over an hour, with children performing traditional dances and songs from their home countries. Parents shared stories of how the foundation's projects had transformed their communities, providing education, healthcare, and clean water to people who had never dreamed such improvements were possible. Each testimony served as a powerful reminder of why William and Kate had dedicated their lives to charitable work. As the crowds began to disperse, Marcus from Kenya approached with a special presentation. "The children in our school wrote these letters," he explained, handing Kate a thick folder. "They wanted you to know that even when the newspapers said bad things about you, we never doubted your good hearts. We know you are true friends too." Africa. Kate clutched the letters to her chest, overwhelmed by the loyalty and love of people she had helped, but who were now helping her heal. The surprise gathering became a turning point in their recovery from the investigation's trauma. Seeing tangible evidence of their foundation's impact reminded William and Kate why they had endured months of scrutiny and criticism. The children's faces, bright with health and hope, were worth every difficult moment they had experienced. Their presence in London proved that good work speaks louder than political investigations or media speculation. That evening, as they tucked their own children into bed, George asked about all the visitors who had come to their home. William explained how their foundation's work had helped children around the world receive education and medical care they desperately needed. "So you help kids like me, but who don't have as much?" George asked, with the simple clarity that only children possess. Kate nodded, realizing that her son understood their mission better than many adults who had questioned their motives as they sat together in their sitting room that night. Surrounded by gifts and letters from grateful families, William and Kate felt a peace they hadn't experienced since before the investigation began. The surprise visit from their foundation's beneficiaries had provided something more valuable than any legal vindication or audit report. It had reminded them that their work mattered, that lives had been saved and improved, and that love and gratitude could overcome suspicion and doubt. The heart-wrenching surprise of seeing hundreds of children whose lives they had touched proved that their foundation's mission was far from over. Instead of being defeated by the investigation, they were inspired to work even harder, with better documentation and increased transparency, to continue changing lives around the world. The children who had traveled so far to thank them had given William and Kate the greatest gift possible: renewed purpose and unshakable confidence in their calling to serve others.